the small positive, Taimur, that I thought, I mean, even the conflict is raging and China is not quite opened up, and therefore supply chain snarls aren't sorted. We're seeing commodities come off quite meaningfully, and now oil too has started to come off. Now, I think a few people are penciling in that an oil price reversion is almost inevitable in a case of a recession-like scenario, if not an actual recession. So if that were to happen, which is starting to play out, and I would love to understand how you are thinking about oil, by the way, and commodities at large, do you think that's a tailwind? And primarily, actually, a prequel to this question is, what is your view on commodities and oil?
Quick answer to the last question, and then I'll go to commodities. So I think that, of course, lower energy is always a tailwind for the oil importing part of the world. And thankfully, most of the world is oil importing. And this high price of oil certainly has dented consumer expectation. So price going low will help on the margin. No question about that. It certainly does not hurt, but levels are high. So we are still talking about 100 plus oil. You could argue that nominally and in real terms, this does not mimic the oil shock of the 70s, but let's hope and pray that we don't have to deal with the 70s. This is painful. Okay, so commodity market view. I think that the Western strategy around oil initially was a bit misguided, but it's working out correctly now, which is don't get in the way of Russia selling discounted oil to India, China, and whoever wants to buy it. But at the same time, make sure that the producers in the West ramp up their production, as well as the producers in the Midwest and Middle East. And I think that is beginning to happen. And so just from a supply side, what one would like to see is cheap oil from Russia continuing to flow to wherever it goes. So Russia's earnings from the oil is not very high. The windfall is not big, somewhat lower. But at the same time, there is a strong supply response in the rest of the world, and that balances out. Before the pandemic, the US was producing 13.5 million barrels a day. After the pandemic, it went down by almost 30% to 10.5 million barrels a day. The US certainly has capacity to produce much more. There are some frictions here and there with respect to manpower, with respect to the rig supply, and also, I guess, some degree of lack of confidence on the part of oil producers in the US because they have seen very sharp swings in the bull and bear side of the market. But I think $100 plus oil month after month will have a magical effect on their willingness to go ahead and start getting rig counts up, start hiring workers, even if it is a high cost, because it's profitable for them. That's why I think that in the near term, around the recession fear, as well as finally the correction of the strategy of the West with respect to sanctions, I think bodes well for the oil market, as in from an oil consumer's perspective, which I would like to think that most of us are. But also at the same time, just from a long-term perspective, one does want relatively high price of fossil fuel. If there's going to be a green transition, it will not happen with $30 oil, because then it doesn't make any sense to switch. So whether it is through regulation or through taxes or through whatever reason, if we only have high prices of commodities, then we will want to switch to solar and wind and so on. So in some ways, you probably want oil price not to crash, because that will undermine the green agenda.